Please do so. We're going to be chatting for about an hour tonight. And we're going to have plenty of opportunity for discussion. But we also wanted to make a little space for a step back from the doom scrolling, from the poll updating, from the fugue state that so many of us are in right now, while also out knocking doors and completely consumed by the election, it seems. But we also know that we're not consumed by the election, and that there will be a life that will continue. There will be a world, and that there are many doppelganger worlds that we're seeing that are only going to continue to accelerate. So yeah, my name is Sophia, or Soph. I use they, she pronouns. I'm a member of Groundwork and former National Political Committee member of DSA, and am leading this political education program with Groundwork, which is a Marxist, eco-socialist, feminist caucus of DSA. Our slogan is Socialists Must Lead. And that's what we're trying to put into practice with our mass organizing work through the election and beyond. And I'm so thrilled to be introducing Daniel Denvir, who many of you know as the host of The Dig, which is an amazing, crucial podcast. Daniel also does a ton of movement organizing work with Reclaim Rhode Island, where he lives, and was an uncommitted delegate this year too. So yeah, Daniel, if there's anything that you want to say to introduce yourself, or to talk about how you're feeling this moment the night before the election, and then we'll dive into the questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I feel a lot of different ways, and I think we'll get we'll get into it in our discussion. In some ways, I feel kind of foundationally optimistic in the sense that I still believe that the left is in a stronger position than it's been for a long time, in recent years. But then proximately rather pessimistic in the sense that though I'll be sort of relieved if Harris prevails and Trump loses, both outcomes present tons of different problems and are, depressing in different ways and to different degrees, which is something I think we'll be talking about.
So if you're muted.
Awesome word. Thank you. So yeah, let's dive into these questions. So for much of the last year, you've been super immersed in what was originally, I think, going to be a two-part episode on the history of 20th century Arab revolutions, which ended up becoming this like 15-part project with Thawra. So can you talk more about that process? Why it felt so important to be going really deep into political education during this accelerated genocide in Palestine. And also, as you were like really becoming somebody who was getting a lot of spokesperson opportunities, and like people were asking like, what is the role of the uncommitted movement and the role of the left in where we're at in this presidential election year?
So Thawra started out being a sort of rolling series on the history of 20th century Arab East politics, specifically Arab East political radicalisms, Arab nationalism, Baathism, communism. And the reason that I started working on the series with Abed Takriti, and I'm really pleased that a number of you seem to have already listened to all 40 hours, which is impressive and gratifying. The reason I started it is because, immediately in the weeks after October 7th, it was clear to me that what was lacking in mainstream public discourse was historic context. So, the first episode, one of the first episodes I did was with Tarek Bakoni on Hamas, and actually, moving beyond the hyper demonization of Hamas to actually understand what it is organizationally, where it came from. And then from there was like, well, there's a particular kind of contemporary Orientalist discourse that's so key to legitimating the mass killing of Palestinians in particular and Arabs in general. And this discourse sort of frames Palestinians and Arabs in particular as like fundamentalist Muslim extremists. And knowing just like at that point a little bit about the history of the region, I knew that there were long periods where uh, where the region politics were in fact dominated by left-wing secular nationalists, and that it was Zionism and U.S. imperial and Western imperialism's defeat of those secular left nationalist projects, that actually created the vacuum that that political Islam came to fill. But I also realized that I actually didn't know very much beyond those basics. I realized, for example, that I didn't really know what Baathism uh, was, for example, beyond it being the party that Assad and Saddam Hussein had belonged to, and that there was that, and vaguely that there was some kind of like admixture of socialism and Arab nationalism going on there. And so the primary rationale for doing the series was that the the mystification of this entire history and the sort of flattening of Arab reality into this into this sort of like two-dimensional demonology was precisely the prerequisite for the for not only the genocide in Gaza, but for the normalization of the entirety of the Zionist project in Palestine, and more broadly, just constant Western intervention into the Arab East. That has just been the constant reality of the Arab East since the end of World War One. And so, how is it possible, given that the U.S., that we're able to frame them as the aggressors, when in fact the entirety of the history of Arab East politics is trying to solve the puzzle of how to get free of Western colonialism and Arab nationalism, communism, Baathism, all of these different various forms of political Islam. They're all just trying to figure out the answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that like for me, listening to that series over as y'all were doing it was super helpful for demystification, exactly, of knowing where these threads are coming from, why people might be operating the way they are, and how do we like think about strategy once that demystification has happened. So when I was prepping this and listening again to the conversation that you had with Naomi on a recent episode about Doppelganger, y'all were talking specifically about Steve Bannon's MAGA plus ideas and the coalition that he's built, and how diagonalists are watching all of the failures of the left really closely. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about like how that analysis in Doppelganger might be influencing the way you're thinking about results tomorrow, or like how it in terms of the demystification of what may or may not happen, or as the analysis starts to come fast and furious in the wake of tomorrow. Why is Doppelganger an important book to be reading, to be thinking about that? You're muted.
My turn to be the muted one. There's so much that's so useful to think through the present with in Doppelganger. Hold on, I have to ask someone to quiet down. Some of you might know who I just asked to be quiet personally. Um, um, uh, so there's so much good to think through the political moment in Doppelganger. I absolutely love the book. It's actually just like literarily like a pleasure to read, and it's like a very weird book, perfectly suited to a very weird moment. And I'll answer the Steve Bannon question in a second. But another thing that I think so amazing about it, particularly since it was written before October 7th, is how much of the book is dedicated to, kind of Amy Césaire's idea of the colonial boomerang and the way that Western civilization is premised on this sort of exterminationist colonial violence in the periphery. Um, and that's something that I'm thinking a lot right now when we have this, uh, you know, Democratic Party that's pretending to be this kind of inclusive, multicultural, tolerant force in the face of a racist, xenophobic, fascist threat, and is in fact fundamentally complicit in ongoing genocide in Gaza and an ongoing genocide being carried out by an Israeli government that is itself the vanguard, really on the bleeding edge of of a global fascist far right resurgence. That involves Trump, Orban, um, uh, Malay, and Netanyahu's at Maloney, Le Pen, etc. And 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 it is Netanyahu who is at the vanguard of that with his genocide in Gaza. As Gustavo Petro has said, it's really like, Naomi in my interview with her sort of quibbled with Petro's language here, but I like it. I think it's that Israel has rendered Gaza into this laboratory of the future in terms of normalizing the sort of you know mass murder of surplus populations that will become the functional requirement of the system as it moves into growing periods of climate chaos and whatnot. Um, Anyhow, the fact that this supposed liberal multicultural uh, force that's supposed to be protecting us from the fascist threat is in fact the key partner to the vanguard of the global fascist far right movement. Is I think that's important, and the history that Naomi details in Doppelganger is useful to think through there. Um, on the Bannon point, also very interesting. Just because Bannon is above all else a strategist. He's trying to build this MAGA plus operation. He sees this potential in this process of class de-alignment of working class people moving from the Democratic Party coalition to the Republican Party coalition. He sees that becoming a multiracial process, something that became clear in 2020 and is becoming more clear this year. And he's like, how can we accelerate that? That's fantastic. Um, uh, and instead, so often we obviously have some great people in this room who think a lot about strategy on the left. We have great strategic organizers all over the country, but too often on the left, people think through political actions as to like how, I mean, it's an overused, maybe a problematic term, but to virtue signal to say, how can I convey to my peers and to the public, to my posting public, that I'm a good person with the right beliefs. And it's actually incumbent on us to think strategically about how to build enough organized power to root it in the working class to win, period.
Yes. Yes. Oh, 100%. And I think that you wrote a thread about that like today that was saying exactly that. And so I'm curious what you think the priorities of an organized left that's rooted in the working class could or should be if we see unexpectedly great result tomorrow, which seems within the realm of possibility, given the Seltzer poll that was the shock heard around the world, and there's been in some ways a vibe shift, and so there's like a question now of yeah, are we thinking about the PRO Act again? Are we thinking about codifying Roe v. Wade? What are the possibilities there that can root a left that is also about the internationalism at the core, as you talked about so many times on Taura and other Dig episodes?
Right. I mean, So I mean, regardless of what happens, I think, well, I mean, if there is a possibility to do the PRO Act, I think that's incredibly important. Um, I think the position of labor is important to is strategically acknowledge. It's not like oppression in the workplace is the most important sort of oppression morally. Um, Again, the question is whether we want to confront the climate crisis or stop U.S. arms to Israel, both of which, you know, morally are certainly on like the same level as labor exploitation in the workplace in the United States of America. Um, or even, it's just like not, it's not about morally comparing them. But if like we care about all of these things, and lo and behold, it turns out that the answer to all of them is to move from a position of moralistically kind of pleading or requesting policy changes on this manner, which is of extremely limited effectiveness, and being in the position where we have enough organized power to actually directly govern rather than petition the governors. And and I and I think labor is just absolutely core to that. So anything that can facilitate the growth of labor density, and within that process, the increasing uh, uh, the as not just not just the increase of labor density, but alongside that, the increase in left-led militant unions, like what we've seen at the UAW. That said, I don't work in labor. I'm not a labor organizer. I'm a podcast host, but I also, in my free time, in many hours of my free time, I spend helping to run Reclaim Rhode Island, which is a housing justice, above all else, a housing justice and tenant organizing group. And I think tenants are, alongside labor, another key site for organization. I think there are a lot of technical challenges that tenant union organizers are experimenting with and confronting all over the country. It's very hard to organize tenants for a variety of reasons, but it's easier to organize tenants than it is to organize people around a lot of other things. um, and so I'm also open to there being other sites that people can be organized around. And I'm not against kind of mobilization, momentum type like organizing. I was part of Uncommitted, which was like a classic momentum operation. I think we need to do those kind of things all the time, but we also when the opportunities present themselves, but we also just need to like create mass or mass organizations in a way that we just don't have right now. So it's easy for me to say that because we don't have them. um, Create mass organizations that hold people over hold people in positions of meaningful membership and leadership over time. And I think within more ideologically self-selected uh, selecting organizations like DSA, I think what you guys are doing here in terms of uh, a contribution process amongst ideologically self-selecting people is exactly what's required to then have the sorts of people with the sorts of organizing chops to go out and build the mass organization.
Yeah, I think that's something that I have been really trying to dig into with comrades around like remembering the cycles of organizing training and like development, and then also like thinking back to, yeah, whether it was momentum style organizing or mass protest, and how much resistance work was necessary during Trump's first term. And so I'm curious if there's anything, maybe we'll close out with this question, is like, if it is a worst case scenario tomorrow, or if we see potential like insurrectionary violence that like ripples over the coming weeks, what are lessons or things that are on your mind from being somebody who was active during that time when you were getting the dig up and running, when you were thinking about like building a political home and like, yeah, the cycles of organizing trainings that it took to really make lifelong cadre? What's something that you would tell to a room full of like militants about what needs to be focused on to do that process?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert at quantification. It's something I'm trying to, along with other people, figure out at present. But I agree with the premise of the question, which is that it's important. Um, but in terms of 2016, I think one salient difference is I don't think we're going to see uh, the liberal resistance in the same way this time around if Trump wins. I mean, just remember when the Muslim ban was a key site for mass liberal left kind of coalitional organizing. That's not going to happen again, I don't think, unfortunately, because um, when Trump won, there was a kind of liberal left shared consensus that Trump's border wall was bad. Now the Democratic messaging is Harris being like, Trump didn't even build his border wall. I mean, it's really
Yep.
bleak. Um, there was a brief moment of kind of uh, salutary partisan polarization on immigration, and that's collapsed. And given that nativism and anti-immigrant politics is at the core of the Trump phenomenon, as it is of the far right throughout the world, especially in Europe, but not exclusively, um, it's it, it means uh, that that even more of it's going to be on the left. I
Mm.
think, which is actually unfortunate because um, as much as I would ideally, I would love a situation where the socialist left is powerful enough to govern on its own. Given the balance of forces, I tend to think that our best bet is some sort of left liberal alliance. But at the same time, I don't see how that alliance is possible right now when the Biden Harris administration has doubled down on committing a genocide and relatedly sort of told us to go fuck ourselves. So,
Mm.
it kind of takes two to form an alliance. And I think the left was actually pretty pragmatic coalition, pragmatic coalition partners to liberals over in recent years. And it's liberals have sort of made that impossible, at least on the national level. Different stuff happens at the state level. I do all this work in Rhode Island where, I can be I can say whatever I'm feeling about our uh, federal delegations, disgusting complicity in genocide every day, and it doesn't really affect my ability to negotiate over housing legislation with centrists in the state house. So that's another discussion. They're just kind of disjointed. And I don't know how true that is in other places or whether Rhode Island's just kind of a universe unto itself.
No, I think that's definitely true. And I would just say that that was a core part of the strategy with Groundwork and SMC's Socialism Beats Fascism work around like really being able to highlight down ballot races or ballot measures or that sort of thing where we're not ceding the electoral terrain, even if we might be sidestepping the question around Harris in like safe blue states.
Yeah.
But as you said in your tweet thread too, like the equation changes when it comes to swing states and like knowing what to do there.
Yes.
So I'll just say a couple of questions I got here in the stack, and then if you want to loop that, bring that into like any closing thoughts. And then we'll pivot to part two from there. So, one of the questions is how the Marxist theory of class and the position of the proletariat inform your view of around the role of labor organizing in terms of overcoming the severity of the issues. So, if you want to talk about yeah, proletarianizing or the proletariat and its position in terms of how we're rooting ourselves and building power, and then also you've interviewed a lot of very interesting organizers and writers recently. And was there anything that was said which didn't make the cut or that got said off air, off the record, anonymously, that stuck with you that you want to share?
Um, oh God, the first question I'm really going to disappoint on because while I consider myself a Marxist, I'm not much. I'm like actually not much of like a Marxologist or like a Marxian. I've read like Capital Volume 1. I'm most obsessed with the 18th Brumaire. You know, I've not read the Grundrisse or German ideology. Like I would like to become a little bit more of a Marxian as time goes on, but I think you're going to find my Marxism most in just sort of my like the like my method, my approach to understanding history and politics rather than having a sort of like orthodox Marxist position on the proletariat. Which is not to say I don't think that uh, that's I'm not trying to discount the importance of that. That's just not been a sort of uh, central focus in my study. I mean, I guess I get I or one way I could answer that is that I guess the sorts of Marxist approaches to classes that most interest me are those that look at class composition as a historical and contingent process. So there's not kind of like obvious answers as to like what the working class, who and what the working class is at any moment, and those are those relate to objective, quote unquote, objective relations of production, but also all sorts of other things. Like look at how we've considered how one might place a teacher or a nurse, say, in different ways over the past century,
Mhm.
and how increasing proletarianization of certain uh, occupations that would have previously been considered or attempted to frame themselves as professional has
Mhm.
been kind of has been really core, has been have generated really kind of um, key key figures in the class struggle in recent years. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'll both say I'm not the greatest Marxian, and also then actually walk that back and say I'm very interested in like the historical contingencies of class composition.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a very good Marxist analysis of class formation, of where we're at. And, with groundwork, we talk a lot about it in terms of class alignment strategies, and why we really feel that, like, building an independent working class base, being really specific about who we're in coalition with, like, that
Mhm.
matters, because
Yes.
these are historical processes in terms of where the class comes from, and who we're organizing with. Yeah, so I think we're gonna call it there and pivot to Francis and Autumn if we want to switch who is highlighted. Thanks so much, Daniel. I really appreciate this. It's been so good. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for doing all this important work.
I don't know if I'm transitioning to Autumn or Francis first. So whoever wants to go can. We're going to hear updates from Safe State and Swing State and what's been happening with Socialism Beats Fascism. And then from there, we are going to go into an open discussion time for a few minutes. So take it away.
Sweet, thank you
Francis,
so.
if I go first.
Yeah, go for it, Autumn.
Sweet, sweet. I appreciate it. Sorry, y'all. Coming here from a car. I got my coworker, Ladonis, with me. He's also outreach officer for Milwaukee DSA. We're coming to you live from Madison after hitting some doors. So, I'll say to just like the stuff that was talked about with labor. Definitely feel like there's at least in Wisconsin a feeling of kind of the ascendancy of labor. In my day-to-day work, people are stoked to get in a fun, exciting way. But more to like our own, electoral conditions in Wisconsin. Um, I'm feeling cautiously optimistic that fascism does not win here in Wisconsin. Um, and we'll see what happens. But no matter what, we do have an election night watch party going on tomorrow night that we got scheduled alongside a school board elected. She actually received 60,000 votes, I think something like that. Missy Zombor, who represents us, DSA endorsed elected on the school board, and she's going to be announcing our kickoff of a new school board race to get her a little sidekick on the school board. And so being able to, no matter what happens, come election day, be able to have a defense here in the Milwaukee schools for our trans folks, for queer kids, to be able to take on policing in our school system and be able to kind of give a vision of what we're able to immediately do. And stoked for that. But more broadly, we're also looking at we've met as our exec council, and we're prepared for a street action on Friday. No matter what the results are, and being able to really just take this energy, hopefully, and do maybe a little test case of of what this liberal energy is like out in the world. If we're able to kind of collect it, harness it, and get folks out to the street. And we're thinking of taking some of that energy and being able to then pour it directly into our campaigns, right? So as people are out marching, the energy in the crowd is all there. Hopefully, like, make a direct ask. We're gonna go for school council. Can we get people to commit to hitting the doors for this? Can we get people to commit to doing XYZ thing? Have a whole ladder of engagement ready to be able to get folks plugged in directly into the chapter and into a democratic movement. And I think that's kind of the core of what we're doing. And the chapter has gone through a whole big overhaul recently to prepare us to really be able to have a full democratic and nimble direction where the membership can throw together a proposal and we can act on it, and it has to have like a full plan attached, right? And so we have some new exciting, fingers crossed, win with a defensive right to counsel who just won, and we can use some of this stuff to hype up and set the vision of what mass organizing looks like, of what people powered organizing looks like. And we have the history of like 10,000 Power to the People signatures, which is our public utility energy campaign. That's kind of our longer term campaign going on. And those folks can be directly contacted about our school board race and directly talked to about what it means to have power in your home if your kids are going to school, and being able to actually like complete their homework, and what it means for a power shut off in the middle of winter for kids who are going to school. And so trying to kind of like weave all of this together in a swing state. I feel like we got the energy here. The chapter is prepared, and more than anything else, like we're dialed in and focused on what we can do, both at our leadership level, but the entire membership. It feels like a whole energy kind of to be prepared to take on whatever happens after Tuesday.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Autumn. Domino, anything that you want to add to since you're here?
Just tagging along. I was glad to hear the host of the dig guy. That was great. Love your work.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. We really appreciate the update from on the ground in the car. And Francis, I'll pivot over to you now to give us an update from the safe blue skies of Los Angeles.
Yeah, absolutely. I am also on the ground in the car. Hey everybody, I'm Francis. I'm in DSA Los Angeles, and one thing that I wanted to talk about is that we are really anticipating a big like recruitment push. So we're prepping as a chapter for like how can we recruit people into DSA right after the election. And in Los Angeles DSA, we have a number of campaigns that are going to be wrapping up with election day. Like we have 2 city council races, like one that's a long shot but is still like within the realm of winnability, and then one that I think we've got, although knock on wood, never say never, and I don't want to get superstitious here, but anyway, 2 city council races. We also have a school board race. We also have a city council in Burbank race. So we have a lot of like exciting stuff that's been happening and that like our members have been turning out to, and we've been making a lot of contacts with people who aren't yet DSA members. So as soon as we hit election day, like we really want to pivot to making the ask to folks to join DSA from those campaigns. And so the way that we're tackling it is we're plugging into kind of the national framework that is available of like choose solidarity, build DSA. But we're also saying like, okay, every campaign working group, every committee, we have geographic branches in LA. So every branch can you set specific goals of how many people you think you can recruit from your list that you have right now. So if a campaign has, has been knocking thousands of doors and they've been turning out volunteers every single weekend, and some of them are DSA and some of them aren't, like maybe they can say, okay, I think we can recruit 20 new members. And that's like, yeah. And also, yeah, Los Angeles is Kamala's home base. So watch this space. Yeah, so every campaign working group, committee, or like chapter body can set a specific goal for how many people they think that they can recruit. And then we're making individual recruitment links, join links for each chapter body so people can track, like, are they actually heading towards meeting that goal or not meeting that goal. And additionally, when we have a lot of work going on in LA. So we have a lot of different chapter bodies and little like working groups, campaigns, etc. So when you add all those goals up, like we can set a goal of recruiting, close to 300 members before the beginning of the year. And that's like LA's situation. That's like just the work that we have going on and the structure that we have going on. But I think every chapter can be setting like recruitment goals right now because, no matter what happens tomorrow, like people are in this moment of like paying attention to politics, and it's like the time when people are most politicized of the year, of every 4 years. So it's an opportunity to be like, hey, you know what? The system is really fucked, and DSA does have like an alternate way to building power. And you should join and be a part of that and help us build that. So our big push for post-election is recruitment. And, I think we are in some ways able to like focus on that because we are in a safe blue state. So it's a little bit like just a different dynamic than if we were in a swing state. But I do think any chapter, whether you're in a safe blue state or a deep red state or a swing state, can be focusing on making those asks and building the organization post-election. In
Awesome.
2020.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, in 2020, we had built out as DSA all this organizing infrastructure to bring thousands of people in, and we don't have that built out in 2024. But at the chapter level, we can build a lot of it and still make a lot of progress.